Hello and welcome to another webinar from the Axim Global Webinar Series. My name is Andrew Ruffner and I will be your moderator for today's call. Before I hand over to our presenter today, I'd like to go through just a couple of housekeeping points. So first of all, as you probably noticed throughout the call, you will be muted, which means you're in listen-only mode. However, your webinar client has got a question section. So if you've got any questions throughout the presentation, please post them right away. We will try to either answer them throughout the call or definitely at the end of the call when we've got a Q&A session. We will also post those responses together with the recording of the webinar after this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and we will make this webinar available on our website, on the Axim Global website, and we will also make it available on YouTube within the next 24 hours. So if you want to share it or you want to listen to it one more time, then that will definitely be available to you. And ultimately, I'd like to invite you all to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter for new webinar announcements and more. With that having been said, it is my pleasure to introduce you to John Bambenek, who from ThreatSTOP, who's Vice President of Security Research and Intelligence. And John, I suggest that you introduce yourself and then take us through the presentation. Thanks very much.
Sounds good, and thank you for having me. As I said, my name is John Bambenek. I work at ThreatSTOP, running the Security Research and Intelligence team. I also teach at the University of Illinois, where I'm finishing my PhD in machine learning, and I'm a handler with the Internet Storm Center. I've been working in the industry now 19 years, actually, so kind of a long history of things now where I focus on investigative efforts, particularly to attribute criminals and hopefully bring them to justice. Been involved in a lot of high-profile cases, from the election-related hacking in 2016 to a couple of recent arrests behind Kelios and some others. So I try to focus my somewhat extracurricular activities on disruptive activity towards criminal enterprises. But I also produce a lot of open source intelligence, independent of myself, on domain generation algorithms and malware and Bitcoin activity that I give away to the community. So how we're going to go about this presentation today and what we're going to cover, right? What does the threat profile look like? How we can reduce the attack surface, dealing with historical events. We'll bring it all together, summarize it, and then again, as it was said earlier, questions and answers. Certainly I'll try to answer anything clarifying as we go, as I see them, but there will be time for questions and answers at the end, where you can ask whatever comes up in your mind as we go through this presentation. So, what does the threat profile look like for industries and organizations looking to protect their assets and their organization's cybersecurity? We've seen lots of high-profile stuff. Some of this is actually fairly recently. We with the Singapore personal data hack, where lots of records of Singaporean citizens were compromised. And I bring that up because recently their government and that entity released a very large report on what happened and what they saw. Certainly, we see a lot of stuff with power grids and nuclear facilities. That's been in the press and in our public consciousness for a while. Is more and more we're putting our critical infrastructure online, accessible to the internet, and that can have some bad results if that is breached. In probably the most high-profile case of Stuxnet that targeted Iranian nuclear facilities, where via cyber means we were able to cause industrial sabotage. There's British Airways. There's always these organization debilitating ransomware attacks that are going on. Right? You see the article about Rotterdam Port there, but the idea is that really it's becoming more high profile because we're putting more important stuff, more and more important things and assets on the internet, right? Medical equipment, we've had medical equipment for a good long time. Well, now they have computers bolted to the side of them and they're networked, which means threats to our healthcare system are now plausible from people all over the world. So kind of as a summary, right, is the internet, right, is our business backbone. So much of what we do is now internet connected. There's only about 3.8 billion human users of the internet, roughly half of the global population. There's about 1 billion, a little bit more, of hosts in DNS. And there's 8.5 billion devices. So at this point, we have over double the amount of devices on the internet than we have people actually using the internet, right? It's a huge space out there, and it's going to increase radically with Internet of Things because we're putting more and more things online. Some would argue things that don't belong online in the first place, but be that as it may, more stuff is being put on there, right? Connected cars, connected home appliances, so on and so forth. Despite that big number, there's a smaller set of networks and infrastructure we know is malicious, right? We call them rough neighborhoods. Samples of malware, 360 million, active bots, a little less than 100 million, 90,000 vulnerabilities, right? But I'll say that, if I'm defending a network, I don't necessarily care about the 8.5 billion devices. I do care about what's malicious, and I can identify that, and it's an order of magnitude less than what's out there, right? So I can start pre-filtering and targeting my defenses against stuff, networks and infrastructure that I know is bad. The criminals themselves have a big advantage, right? The images of the slide is, malware, then, there's a lot of commodity stuff that's all fairly similar if you go back a decade or more. Now there's thousands of variants of malware, thousands of families of malware, and thousands of variants therein, right? We know what Mirai is, the Mirai botnet of infecting embedded devices and IoTs and webcams and that like, and things of that sort. Now there's many variants of that same family. The limitations of malware is simply the limitations of human creativity. Writing malware is a creative activity where somebody sits down and says, "Oh, I'm going to figure out how to do this." It's how many novels are out there, right? It's not infinite. There's a large number, but it's huge, and you can always create another novel. The same is true with malware. A lot of features of malware that we're seeing is, endpoint specific. Oh, this is Windows, this is Mac. This is multiple stages of malware that tries to get information about the host before deciding what then to deliver. Almost 100 million new malware variants have been seen just in 2016. That number has increased in 2017 and 2018. 29% of active bots are being used maliciously, right? Which about a third of the infected machines are being actively used. There's 2/3 out there that aren't, right? That are just sitting idle and can be deployed from time to time should an attacker decide to do so. Most attacking IPs will attack more than one victim. This goes into why sharing threat intelligence is so important. It seems counterintuitive to work with your competitors. But, if you're sharing threat intelligence data with your competitor, hey, somebody launched a business email compromise attack against my company. Well, tomorrow they may share similar intelligence that allows you to protect yourself because attackers reuse some measure of their infrastructure. It is very hard to redo everything for each attack, right? There's reusing malware. They may tweak it a little bit. There's reusing infrastructure. If you can find those things that persist between attacks, it gives us opportunity to filter and block. 1 in 130 emails contain malicious content. So you're talking about a significant portion of our email that has overt malware, and that's not to talk about scams and other things, which brings that number much higher. But the point is signature heuristics-based security can't keep up, right? It's useful, right? It protects a measure and percentage of threats, but it's not 100%. We talk in security about defense in depth, and the reason is that no tool, no technology will be 100%. It doesn't exist. Signature and heuristic-based stuff is helpful, but it is not sufficient because the attackers can download our endpoint tools. They're commodity software. They can be purchased, and then they can pre-test their attacks to make sure they get through. So certainly there are other things that need to be considered to defend ourselves. But really, we're dealing with, in essence, technology companies when you're talking about cyber criminals. There's a supply chain, there's a hierarchy, there's objectives, they're growth oriented, all the things that venture capital companies want to see in startups. Cyber criminals have that also, right? They use this, forms of clouds. They have campaigns. They can set up, fake storefronts and microsites quickly. In some cases, even have sales and customer service, because it's the people developing the software are not usually the same people who operationalize and actually launch attacks. There's databases and CRMs, in essence, CRMs that they use to coordinate with their customers, the ones who are actually attacking our networks. But they're exceptionally skilled and capable. They do lots of very clever things, and they're very organized, right? You're dealing with organized crime and all the things that come along with that, and they're hyper focused on profit. If you see an attack from a cyber criminal, it's because they think or they know they can make money with it, even if we haven't figured out how that happens. To go to an earlier point that I was making, the people that develop the tools are not necessarily the same people using them. It's a very similar analogy to pen testing, right? If you're a commercial pen tester, you're probably going to Core Security or any number of vendors who sell tools that lets you assess a network. The same is true for criminals. I want to get into banking Trojans or whatever. Okay, then there are people that you can go to on the dark web and in these forums to go purchase the tools required to do that. The same is for phishing. The same is true for a lot of things, right? I don't personally need to know how to deliver 100 million spam messages. I can go to a provider for that. So you don't really need hacking skills to do that, right? As the person who's launching the attacks, you just need to know who to go to purchase your tools, where to purchase your information, how to do research, and then how to use all of that stuff. There's lots of packages of malware, exploit kits, phishing, botnet kits. You can rent botnets based on geography. In fact, a lot of malware delivery, when you go to a company that specializes or an organization that specializes in compromising machines, you pay them. I would like 100,000 compromised machines. I want them in the United States, and maybe I want them involved in healthcare. Whatever it is, right? You can filter to say, this is how much I want, and they will turn around and say, okay, you want 100,000 machines with this criteria? That'll be $250,000 or whatever it is, depending on what you're trying to do. So, and often, right, it can be paid or financed with stolen credit cards. One thing that I'm taking a look at right now is these online sextortion emails. I'm sure all of you have gotten it, where basically you're getting emails saying, oh, you looked at naughty websites, I've hacked your webcam, pay me a bunch of Bitcoin. They're making real money, right? Upwards of $1 million since we've seen it in less than a year. And there's no compromise. There's no security threat. It's just emailing threats. They don't have the videos, and they're making money. They're using that to finance other things that they're more interested in, right? So they develop a lot of ways to maintain their cash flow to then turn that into research to say, okay, I want to use that to develop the next kind of ransomware or some banking Trojan or stealing medical records, whatever it is. So this ecosystem is self-supporting and financially independent in a large sense of that word, right? They're getting really good at what they're doing. They use dynamic DNS and DGAs to rapidly change their infrastructure. A lot of my research is in domain generation algorithms, and there's lots of really interesting things they do with that. A DGA is basically a mathematical algorithm. I give you a defined input, say date, and it gives you a list of domains. So they don't have to register all the domains. They just need to know their algorithm and register a domain when they want to do something, and when it's taken down, then they register a new domain. Right? One family was using currency exchange values as their input to a DGA. So every day the European Central Bank would produce new currency exchange values, and then the list of domains would be generated off of that. And we couldn't predict where they would go ahead of time because there's no way to predict currency values in advance. Right? Malware can identify valuable data and valuable targets. Based on whatever criteria, right? Rudimentarily, most malware authors operate out of Eastern Europe. They will exclude their home countries from victims to make it less likely they'd be prosecuted, right? But it can look for more important things. Oh, this machine is registered to a healthcare environment, so maybe I want to be interested in ransomware or medical record theft, right? They can be very targeted. It can be like, oh, this is somebody I'm not overly interested in. It's a low value target. I'm going to go put a crypto miner on it, so at least I'm making a little bit of cryptocurrency, right? It decides which malware to send. And in some cases, it says, it's not a high value target, so I'm going to put a crypto liner on it so I make a little bit of money that's consistent and operates over a long period of time, right? But like I said, it's being designed for specific endpoints, and it's being designed for specific environments and users of those endpoints, right? But they can tailor their attacks and increase their success rates. It's very, very successful. Our visibility is still limited. Average detection time is 147 days. So an attacker is inside an environment almost 5 months before, on average, before we take it. To remediate it takes another 2 months. If you take a 0-day exploit, then it's even longer, right? Because we don't know how to, the very nature of a 0-day is we don't know anything about it, or we've just learned about it and attackers have known about it some time, right? So, we have some great difficulty there, right? But you see that window of limited visibility prior to that, and then detect it. So if you go back all the way in time, it's 147 days, which is important because once you detect a breach, if you're executive leadership, the question that's in your mind is, what did they take? What did they do? It's immediately retrospective. So we have a period of time where there's limited visibility because our tools can only retain so much data, or many commodity tools can only retain so much data, right? So the question is going back in time. Can you do it without all of the data being present? Sure. But if you're hiring somebody like Mandiant or even myself or an incident response team, we charge by the hour. If I've got the data and I can query it, great. I query it and I move on with my analysis. If I've got to go reverse engineer something and try to figure it out, that takes time. And like I said, it's billed by the hour. If I take five hours because the data's already there, or I take 100 hours, the invoice is going to change, and that's going to increase your breach costs. So what's needed here is a 4-pronged approach, right? The first is obviously full packet capture, and that's complicated, right? And we're going to talk about that complication. But if I've got the data, if I'm an incident responder, and I can just query it, then I can answer the question: what did they take? What is the scope of damage? What else have they infected? I can answer a lot of questions very, very quickly at a much lower cost, because then it's just a query problem. Okay, here's all the data, then I go dig into the data, versus, okay, now I've got to go find other artifacts and other indicators of compromise and go on a fishing expedition. I can do that, right? But it takes time, right? The second is, having a hunt team, right? Go find the bad guys. Deception plays a role in this. So does active defense, where you say, I see these kind of people attacking. I see these kind of things going on. So my defenses automatically adapt to say, okay, now I'm going to block this, or I'm going to send this to a sinkhole, or do any number of things to disrupt attacks that are in progress. Number 3, staying healthy along the way of vulnerability scanning and tracking, making sure that I don't have any known vulnerabilities in my environment, tracking what attacks are going on, and network traffic and things of that sort, to say, hey, this is probably not appropriate places that people should be going to, so we're going to do something about that to prevent that kind of window of exploitation, right? And then, like I said, bringing it all together with a guided security assessment and planning, taking a look at what unique risks are to your organization, what risks you share with your competitors or people in your own community, and plan your defenses accordingly, right? Part of that is, hey, if you're a financial institution, maybe it's joining FS-ISAC to get access to that intelligence, or the Health ISAC if you're a healthcare organization, but basically planning for breach, because the more that you're prepared for that kind of stuff, the faster you can respond to take that breach window from 147 days to much smaller, right? 147 days is average. There have been organizations that have been effectively compromised for 2 or 3 years. There are organizations that are breached that are only really in a compromised state for days, because they're prepared, they've planned for it, they've got a response in place and ways to remediate it, even means without having to hire outside third-party incident response firms. So we're going to focus on these 2, right? Start recording your packets and staying healthy along the way. So now we're going to talk about, right, reducing the attack surface, right? You know, an IPv4, you've got 4 billion IP addresses out there that could potentially be lodging attacks. Many, you know, are good. Many we know are bad. Some we can't make a determination, right? The same is true for DNS. So things that you can talk about in staying healthy, right? Of all of these steps is comprehensive vulnerability management, right? Knowing where vulnerabilities are, where patches are, and being proactive about that. And it's just not operating system patches anymore, especially if you're in an environment where you're doing custom development. You know, it's, hey, this GitHub library I used in my custom code has now an update that fixed a security vulnerability. Well, somebody's got to know that, automate that, and say, okay, now I've got to backport this new library into my code, right? Having complete assessment of passive and active, right? What's vulnerable, what's in my network, active of actually trying to compromise it. Asset tracking is on every top 10 list of doing it. If you don't know you have it, if you don't know it's your asset, then you can't protect it. Automating cloud visibility. Many people are going to cloud infrastructure, right? Is making sure you're aware of things as they change in your cloud environment, right? Many organizations say, okay, you know, here's the broad list of people who have AWS access credentials, and they can spin up VMs and start putting private data on it. If you don't know you have to protect it, you can't protect it. If you don't know it exists, you can't protect it, right? You want the data to come to you. Data visualization is something we've not necessarily been very good at in the security industry, because you know most people are really command line oriented. But we need these intuitive dashboards to sit there and say, hey, this is bad and you need to pay attention. Part of the reason that 147-day breach time exists is the data is there to say there's a problem. It's just nobody knows how to interpret it. Nothing flags it to say, hey, this is a bad thing and you need a human being to look at it right now. You want to passively be monitoring your network, right? We've talked about capturing packets, but DNS logs, DNS query logs, is seeing what people are looking up gives immense visibility into an organization. It lets you know policy violations, but it certainly lets you know malware and other malicious activities. DNS tunneling is another example, right? Is people use DNS queries and responses to embed content to steal data. There's a big case of that involved in Pakistan in their banking community, where people were using DNS tunneling to steal financial information, right? And if you're looking for that and know to look for that, it stands out. You want to eliminate your blind spots. You need as much visibility as you can for endpoints that may leave your network or mobile devices, if that's a core part of your infrastructure. This one is important, right? Is there's so much malware, there's so many security incidents out there, right? Anybody who's ever manned an IDS knows this. Is you've got so much information to work with, no one is ever going to have enough people to deal with it all. It's not going to happen. So we need ways to boost productivity, right? And limit the amount of things that they have to deal with, and limit the time that they've got to deal with it. If we can sit there and just click a button to say, stop this threat, right? Then their time to response is not days, it's hours or minutes, right? But it comes down to seeing what matters fast, efficiently, and being able to respond fast and efficiently. So here's your typical network diagram. You've got your external network and a public DMZ, and your internal network where you're capturing information. So there are places where you can reduce the attack surface, right? And I'm pointing at three different things, right? Your remote users, your firewall, and your DNS resolver, right? And your internal systems. And all three of those places, you could start to reduce your attack surface by staying out of those rough neighborhoods that we talked about before, right? As we generally know where malware command and control servers are. We know what the bulletproof networks are. We can even tell you a list of top-level domains that really you should never go to, right? Is that there's no business reason to go to a domain that's .tk, except in a radically specific circumstance that I can't get around my mind. If you're a medical environment, your MRI machine should not be communicating to Eastern Europe. There's just no business reason for that. You could block that entirely. But you want to stay out of those rough neighborhoods, because that starts reducing your attack surface, right? We know attackers come from certain places. proactively block it in DNS at your firewall and at your remote users, so that their ability to be compromised is much less. It's never 100%, but if we already know these things are bad, we know it's 100% bad if they go there. If you block it, then you're eliminating some measure of the threats, and it's really a large amount of threats that you can block in this way. So as an example of using ThreatSTOP of how to do that. So there's a sequence of events, right? ThreatSTOP integrates lots of feed sources, both in open source research, our research, various feeds and security partners. There's government inputs from certs and all over the world that give information relatively broadly. Governments are doing good about saying, hey, we know these are bad. All of my businesses should be blocking this, right? So taking all of that data and putting it into a threat engine, right? That gives you several things, right? Reporting is a big thing. I've got an overburdened security staff. They need to know what is important going on my network, what has been blocked, what do I need to remediate, what bears more research, right? Our threat engine is powered by human analysis, by my team, and machine analysis that does some machine learning. And there's an AI feedback loop where we take the logs we get back, do some calculations to proactively identify new suspicious stuff. I can't categorize it. I know it's, hey, this is anomalous, this is bad. But the idea is to start detecting this stuff before it goes bad, block it proactively. So when the time it does go bad, it's already blocked, right? The core problem that we have in information security is if you take a look at that sources on the left, something bad has already happened. We've identified it's bad. We've reverse engineered it and come up with indicators of compromise to say, now you can block this stuff. So the time from attack to defense is non-zero, right? The notion of the feedback loop is to try to bring that to before the attack, or at least as close as possible to when the attack starts, to reduce again, right? That window of limited visibility to full defense. Users have ThreatSTOP have custom policies. They can pick and choose based on what threats they think are important, what geographies they want to block, a wide variety of broad and tailored defenses, and they can add in their own user-defined list to say, hey, these are my important servers. Make sure to never block them. These are threats that I'm seeing. They may be targeted, they may be not. I'm going to block it, and within 15 minutes, all my devices throughout all of this are now blocking it. It's something that can work with next generation firewalls, routers, DNS devices, anything that you have, cloud derived and pushed down, including for remote users. So you've got a wide variety of things to basically provide the ability to block everywhere. I've talked about, like I said, the importance of putting this on DNS, right? Query logs are important. But almost all malware starts with a DNS query, right? Think of a phishing email you got. It says, oh, change your Google account password, right? You got to click on a link. That link has a URL that's got to start with a DNS query. If the DNS server says, hey, that's bad, I'm not going to let you go there. Then the DNS query fails and the attack fails, even though the user clicked. So that's highly customizable. It's very powerful. It's not broadly deployed, but really ought to be, because almost every bad attack on an endpoint, or even command and control and exfiltration, DNS tunneling, all of it, DNS is in the chain, and if DNS is aware and blocks it, then you've blocked the attack. So you can put that on your DNS resolvers that can block based on host names, it can block on TLDs, it can block on IP addresses, lots of various things you could do that, right? We also provide IP defense that goes into your traditional firewalls. If you think of best security practices for 20 years, oh, you need a firewall. Well, firewalls will list, a device that can do a large amount of blocking. People put access control lists on it. Oh, you want to go to port 80? I'll let you go to this server. Oh, you want to do email? I'll let you go to this server. But these devices have the ability to block bad IP addresses and block IP net blocks. It's built in. It's been there for 20 years. But, you can't manually curate that, right? If you have an automated system that says, hey, you know what? These are the 20,000 worst IP addresses on the internet, or the 20,000 worst blocks, net blocks on the internet. Now it's blocked at your border firewall. You never see it. You don't have to worry about IDFs. You don't have to worry about doing the analysis because it's proactively blocked. But what to do about, your roaming users, people who are not necessarily always in your corporate network. Right? We have what we call roaming defense. We'll put a stub resolver on any device you have, Mac, Linux, Windows, and it will enforce your DNS policy on that device to say, oh, okay, if you're a healthcare environment, your doctor goes home, accidentally clicks on something, well, they weren't attacked. And it's easy to say, hey, what they do at home is their own business. But if it's on a company laptop and they turn around and bring that back into the corporate environment, yeah, they got malware delivered, executed, and now running on your corporate device. Now it's being brought into the network where it's gone through all the chains of exploits and stages, and now you have a much more difficult problem, right? And that's the reality is, that I'm giving this webinar on a corporate laptop that I'm provided by ThreatSTOP that most of the hours of the day are not on a ThreatSTOP network. I go home and I check email like everybody else. I travel for work. This device is not protected by our perimeter defenses. Something else needs to be on that to provide, at least some effective perimeter defense. And that's what we provide with roaming defense. And then integrating it with SIM data to do those policy reports and all the various flavors of data that people have known and expect in their solutions, right? But all of this does three things, right? Saves time. The policy updates are automatically applied. They're curated by a team of professionals. You can view these rich reports in your SIM or our portal. You can rapidly identify infected hosts. Hey, this thing's querying bad places. It's severity 5. I need to go look at that. You could do some typical threat intelligence platform functionalities with our check IOC to say, hey, I'm seeing this IP address, this DNS name. Is it something I should be cared about? You can create reports off of it, right? You save money, right? You're using devices you already have. You're just making them more effective. Everybody's got a DNS resolver. Everybody's got a firewall. They've had them forever. You're just adding security using functionality already present in the device instead of, oh, I got to add another appliance. Oh, I've got to add another tool or another this, another that. You're using what you already have, and that's much more efficient, right? You can reduce endpoint infections and stop breaches. You can make it more obvious if something gets through. You can eliminate unwanted bandwidth usage. You can increase security and network efficiency, and certainly reducing the amount of alerts. Right? The number of times back when I managed a network, oh, somebody got a malware infection. Oh, this is dark comment. Well, I know what dark comment is. I don't need to look at it. It's been analyzed to death. It just needs to be blocked. There's a command and control server, identify it, block it, move on. So that, like I said, that makes you more secure, right? There's continuous updates. You've got telemetry that's unique and valuable for your SOC, for MSSPs, if you're providing that service as a third party. And then you just customize your policies from there, right? So very fine-grained in terms of what you can do to block the known bad, right? And that's what we're talking about, is it's already been identified as bad, by one or often many people. Now you're just blocking it so that you can focus on the unknown stuff. But that brings us to another question, right? What about historical events? Again, our visibility is still limited. There is a chance that you'll be affected at some time after that something's identified as bad, right? A DNS query happened, something reached out to the internet, there's malware that got on there. At some point later, that was identified as malicious. So what do you do, right? So I said, here's your period of limited visibility, and to the point where your breach is detected, going back, right, to your full visibility, 147 days, right? And that's a big problem that we have. We identify things that are bad. Now we need tools to go, hey, have I ever seen this? A lot of CERT reports and other reports you see out there is you see something in the media, right? What's the first question? Are we impacted by this? Well, that requires historical data, right? Right? Months, potentially even years, right? So that goes to these two devices, having a TAP and a packet capture appliance, right? Is being able to sit there and say, okay, the US CERT has said these IP addresses are involved in some APT threat. So, are we vulnerable to that? Have we seen that on our network? You go to your packet capture appliance and go take a look at that. All right. So, right, you have, goes back to good old packet capture, right? You need something open, scalable, cost effective, that can capture all of this stuff at scale, right? And you need months and years of network traffic. You want something that's high speed. Most networks are fairly high speed at this point. For most enterprises, something then get up to 100 gig. Snap-ins to add capacity and throughput, kind of the plugins that people want. But really, the important thing is you want something that can reduce the storage, and because you're dealing with massive scale. If something is recording 100 gigabits a second, you can do the math fairly quickly to see how long it takes you to get to terabytes and petabytes of data. You need something that does some efficient storage, right? So you want massive data at lower cost that can scale, right? Obviously, you want the ability to analyze it at the packet level, pull things out, take a look at interesting, HTTP headers, HTTP or user agents rather. Could provide valuable intelligence about what's going on in your network. You want to be able to search petabytes in minutes. If having a file store of petabytes is great. I would love that if I've ever responded to an incident where I've got petabytes of data that I can go dig through. But if I'm typing in a query and I've got to wait for an hour, well, that's an hour of billable time, right? I want to be able to get something in minutes, have the typical features you want, dashboard alerts, and analytics in a small form factor, right? That is an appliance going into your network. But the idea is this gives me rapid detection, gives me rapid response. It accelerates recovery time. If I've got to wait an hour for a query, that's an hour I'm not fixing the problem. That's an hour I'm waiting for, your hourglass to actually, or your spinning circle Mac OS X of doom to give me the data that I want. So bringing this all together, right? The combination of these solutions, right? So you want to match new threat signatures against historical data to look for that visibility and provide that basis of forensics and incident response, right? You've got things generating telemetry and protection on remote VPN users, on the firewall, on your DNS servers, and then your TAP and your packet capture appliance. You're also examining that stuff, but you're looking retroactively. Say, oh, hey, ThreatSTOP or whatever other feed you may have says, hey, this IP address is now malicious. Can I go back and look to say, hey, have I ever seen traffic, a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago to that infrastructure, right? And now I've got some very rapid tools for a hunt team, right? It reduces the complexity of what your hunt team needs to do. Not completely, right? You're always going to need a human in the mix, but turn around to make it a searching and a query problem to do some of the basic blocking and tackling so that their time is saved up for the things that really require human analysis and reverse engineering and all of the things that go along with high-end security research and response. So to summarize, to wrap it all up, and then go to your questions, right? Reducing your attack surface is a key and necessary investment, right? If you don't do that, then you've got to respond to attacks that should never have been successful. And you have to decide, hey, is this something that really matters? Is this an APT? Is this a targeted attack? Is this commodity stuff? The more you block the known bad, the more you're responding to the stuff that requires the human mind to work, right? And that takes time, that takes effort and energy, and we don't have enough people to analyze everything, right? So you want to reduce that attack surface to focus human effort on the stuff that really matters. We need the historical data, right? There's points in time we identify something as malicious, reverse engineer it, develop indicators, write reports on it. Now the question is, did it ever happen in the past, right? So you really need that historical data based on these new threat profiles. And if you are affected, how do you know what happened? You have to go back, you have to take a look and figure out, okay, here are the IOCs. Now, these are the victim machines. What do these victim machines do at the same time? So you want to combine, like I said, this threat intelligence that's provided. A lot of stuff is online. It's provided by governments. It's provided by certs. There are commercial tools out there. You want to combine that with packet capture to make sure that you're not missing things. And for things that might get missed, you're turning that breach window from 147 days to something much smaller, because every day an attacker's in an environment is more damage they're causing. There's more compliance headaches. There's more reputational harm, more financial harm that you've got to contend with. So with that, we will go to questions and answers. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask me or any of the Axim team, go ahead and use your webinar window now, and we can address that. And certainly, like they said earlier, this webinar is recorded. It'll be available online for further review. So with that, we'll go ahead and pause for questions.
John, thanks a lot for your presentation. I think it was very, very informative. Definitely learned a lot along the way. We've got a couple of questions from the audience, so I'll just start at the top and then go through them one by one. So the first question that we had was, and that was related to the ThreatSTOP solution, I believe, is how this differs from Cisco's Umbrella solution.
The biggest differentiator with ThreatSTOP and Umbrella is one, there's definitely the blocking of DNS queries involved in both solutions, right? With ThreatSTOP, we also block IP addresses on firewalls, which you can't do with Umbrella. But the important thing for me that's the difference, and we're growing an awareness about how much data is being collected by centralized parties and how much data is leaving our environments. The way Umbrella works is basically you point your DNS resolvers to their infrastructure. So they have access to your query logs because you're querying their servers. So there's immense information that you can gather from that, right? In our solution, we're using your DNS servers. You control your query logs. We only request block logs, but you can even negotiate with us for that not to happen where we don't have that. That limits our ability to provide you reports. But you're running your own DNS, so that information is not leaking out of your organization. And in the default scenario, we're only getting logs from stuff that we block. So, we already know something about that information. It gives us telemetry that powers our machine learning algorithms, but we even limit what we collect. So in my mind, it's the biggest difference is you're protecting your privacy. You're optimizing the balance between privacy and security by running your own DNS servers with ThreatSTOP versus Umbrella.
Okay, thank you. The second question that I've got for you is whether there's an agent for ThreatSTOP that complements endpoint protection solutions like SEP.
Yes, so we focus on IP and DNS, right? And typical endpoint solutions look at files. And they do look at behavior and heuristics as well. So there's a complement, and there's a little bit of an overlap in that Venn diagram. We optimize for network activity, they optimize for host activity, but running them side by side on the same infrastructure, provides, like I said, a little bit more defense in depth. Where, and one of the key differentiators between SEP and most endpoint stuff is, hey, I've got a file. I want to make sure that my malware gets through. I can upload it to VirusTotal that gives me a report says, oh, all my malware is not detected by CIF57 malware engines. I'm good to go. The classes of indicators that we have, they're a little bit more difficult for attackers to query. I think both are essential, but they do different things and provide a measure of defense in depth, especially over those devices that are not completely under the control of your IT group. Right? You may give your employees SEP and then they go home with it, and maybe their kids are playing Fortnite or whatever on their laptops. This provides another layer of protection to help make that device more safe. Okay,
great. We have one more question that relates to IP block lists, and the question is basically what or how you would define the difference between players such as ThreatSTOP, and what you deliver over and above what free lists such as SpamHouse deliver. So the question here is related to sort of the average SME customer and what the benefit is to them versus the cost. I believe you've addressed some of it throughout the presentation, but maybe you can elaborate on this.
Sure. The biggest problem with threat feeds is it's raw data, right? And I say this as me personally, one of the largest providers of threat feeds that are open source is the curation is the difficult part of it, right? What do you whitelist? What do you not, right? And Spam House and others look at very narrow and specific things that are very important. They do great work, and I don't mean to disparage them at all, but they focus on spam. That is one piece of the equation. It is not all the equation, right? So having a broad collection of feeds, because every feed looks at a different threat, right? One of my feeds is specifically at domain generation algorithms, right? If you're looking for malware C2s that don't use DGAs, I don't have them. So having the breadth of tools, then there's a curation, right? What is a false positive? One effort that we spend a lot of time on is there's infrastructure that is compromised. It is then used in an attack. So yeah, you definitely want to block it. But at what point do you not block it anymore after it's cleaned? There are many feeds out there that just, if you're listed, you're listed forever. And that's just that, right? You've been infected, you've been used in Emotet or whatever, you're there forever. And then you've got people who complain, it may be business impact or whatever, right? If you've ever been blocked on a threat feed, it's impactful to you. So when do you time that out, right? And when is this threat no longer available, right? And most people don't have devices of the capacity to take every threat feed and just dump it in there, right? My full version of my DGA threat feed is 800,000 domain names a day. If you block that over all of time, just say you block a year's worth of DGA domains, it is, you're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 billion. Now it's more than 20 billion domain names. There's not that many devices that can handle that, but the important thing to note is a DGA is not relevant forever, or a DGA domain is not relevant forever. It's usually time gated. This is the domain used today. This is the domain used tomorrow. So really, I only need a very small window where I'm blocking. So that curation, the intelligence of how this data is created, how it should be used, whitelisting to make sure that one, you're not blocking, core internet infrastructure, because attackers do try to deceive threat feeds also.
Okay, there's a related question that just came in as you were talking, and the question here was, how do you determine that a previously blocked IP is now okay? How do you remove it, whitelist it?
Part of it depends on the context of how it was listed. Most people kind of have threshold examinations of saying, hey, I see this volume of attacks and suddenly it went away. Some will list specific things about that infrastructure that allow me to directly check. Oh, this IP address is a dark command and control server running on port 1234. Well, 1234 is not open anymore and it's closed. So there's a wide variety of checks you can do to make sure, but often it takes some human analysis and some contextual examination to get ahead of figuring out, oh, okay, this has been cleaned, this hasn't, and it can be difficult to automate that, but that's part of the reason why there's humans in the mix, and it's not all machine learning or AI or just blindly listing indicators.
Right. Another question is related to IP version 6. So a lot of the discussion that we had was IP version 4 related. What about IPv6?
IPv6 is going to provide some unique challenges for us. It's going to break a lot of things that we're used to traditionally. If you think about Shodan, for instance, right? It scans every IP address on the internet. There's 4 billion IP addresses. If Shodan just scanned IPv6 networks, right, which is going from 32 bits just to 64, right? I think somebody said it would take about 3 times the life of the universe to do it based on hitting 1 million IP addresses a minute. So the scale of the problem is immense. Now that doesn't impact us with DNS, right? Because if a domain is malicious, a domain's malicious. You can use IPv4, you can use IPv6. We're blocking at the domain level also. Attackers, in some sense, this is surprising to me. We haven't seen much maliciousness in IPv6 at all. They just haven't moved to it yet. But certainly how we gate things, we're going to have to block more broadly because 128 bits is a huge number, right? 30 undecillion, I think, is the word to describe it, right? I had to actually look up exactly what word describes the order of magnitude. We don't have enough memory to put that in IPv6 reputation in any device or database. There's just not enough space. So we'll have to focus on networks in bad neighborhoods. Instead of saying, hey, you know what, this IP address is bad, we could say, hey, this network is bad. And all right, they can, adjust their hosts, their the last 64 bits. But if we're blocking the network, it doesn't matter what they do. We're focusing on the neighborhoods. So in some sense, we'll have to go to more broader blocking when attackers go to IPv6 in earnest.
Okay. One question is a little bit more practical, and it basically the question here is, with ISCs supplied as IP addresses or networks, in the scenarios that you've just described, I mean, how would I go about in investigating potential threats, and how does that assist with forensic analysis?
So the question is how to investigate specific threats in our platform, or was the first? I didn't quite understand the first part of that question.
Okay, the question basically is related to the fact that you were talking about IP addresses or ranges networks that are supplied as malicious, if you will. Right. So if I then go back and look at the recordings, for example, I get these indicators of compromise. I look at some of the recordings. How does that assist me with my forensic analysis, trying to understand what potentially happened?
Gotcha. Right. So, I mean, the reports, right, will include context, and you get that through our portal and SIM integration also, is saying, okay, I mean, this IP address was in a report. It's not that simple. It's saying, oh, okay, this was part of our target of, say, Shifu malware, right? And you look Shifu, what it is, what it does, to give you that context. So it's not just saying, hey, this is blocked. Right, our check IOC, our SIM integration, our portal will say, hey, this is blocked. It's a severity 5 threat that's involved in phishing. Here are the targets it's listed in, and say it's APWG or Fish Tank or Alien Vault or whatever it is. Where you can go further queries. Okay, this is listed in Alien Vault OTX. You go to Alien Vault and say, okay, here's the email or whatever, and do the traditional intelligence work of pivoting. But there's some context given, right? Of the report will come with it already, hopefully. But certainly our platform and tool says, oh, hey, this is blocked as part of this policy. It's phishing, it's malware, it's botnets, it's an inbound threat of SSH scanning, whatever it may be, to say, okay, now I know what the threat is that I'm facing, right? It's phishing. So now I could say, okay, now I'm looking at, what was clicked and when it was clicked and what machines did it, to say, okay, it was this machine, then, it was probably this email that has it. You can go into Exchange and say, okay, now I see the email that came in and who clicked on it and when they clicked on it.
Right, and then I guess judging from what you were talking about earlier on with packet capture as well, then if you've got that historical data, you've got no authoritative data source that you can go back and then look at exactly what happened. So you've got, the indicators, you've got a view on the type of threat that I'm looking at, and I've got a full recording of it. So that basically gives you a pretty good idea of what's going on, and you'll be able to track it. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, no, that's exactly correct, right? Is going back and forth between, okay, I see this report, I see this DNS query, now I know the victim machine that was involved, going to packet capture to look at that victim machine, what happened at the time that said click happens. Oh, it went here. Oh, and now it went to this IP address and downloaded this malware that I can now extract and analyze and do the work of pivoting back and forth, right? You need both sets of visibility to do the work of incident response. Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and then we got one last question, which it basically relates to the skills. I mean, we've talked, or you've talked about quite a broad number of things throughout this presentation. And of course, the challenge that you have specifically if you're a smaller organization, so an SME, is, how do you deploy and manage such a proposed architecture? So can you talk a little bit to the types of skills and maybe the way that, a smaller organization would go about this ideally?
Sure. I said the smaller the organization, the more likely you have one guy who's responsible for security, and he's also the IT guy and the network guy. So part of it is, making these solutions as relatively simple as possible with easy buttons, right? If somebody doesn't have the time or disposition to do a custom policy, there's already pre-built policies. Obviously, you'll need to know some measure of networking, right? DNS queries and packet captures are all basically network protocols. So having some knowledge of that is important. But by and large, I know ThreatSTOP is fairly easy. We say you can get up and running inside an hour. Setting up a packet capture and a tap, that's wiring and putting something in place. And then you have to make intelligible packet capture technologies to know, okay, here is the IP addresses and ports, and know basically how network traffic is built and how that context happens, and then how to extract stuff. So I think basic fundamental knowledge of networking, and I view DNS and how that is a subset of networking, mostly because that's how the internet works. Nobody communicates with an IP address when a human being's involved. It's all DNS that turns it into an IP address that a computer can understand. But certainly, being able to make intelligible decisions based off that, of knowing, what a packet looks like and what headers matter, and how to make sense of it all.
Right. So I guess, if I can summarize it, what you're also saying is exactly to make use of services, well, such as ThreatSTOP, but others in different domains. If you're small, then there's definite benefit of using, if you want, the knowledge and the services that others provide, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel yourself, or alternatively, just keeping yourself exposed. So that's where the financial benefit is, but also the operational benefit of, as I think you call it, the sort of the easy button.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, please.
Oh, no. I was just saying. Yeah. Absolutely. I would agree.
Okay. Great. That sort of takes us to the end of our questions, and also pretty much the end of the hour. So, John, once again, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time and for sharing this insight with you. I would also like to thank the attendees for attending this webinar. Again, please do subscribe to social media so we can keep you updated on future webinars. And as said, this webinar was recorded, so we will be posting this online within the next 24 hours. Thanks again, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.